Hi, I'm Susan Cobb, Interim Head of School at St. Paul Christian Academy, and on behalf of everyone at St. Paul, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you this evening. At St. Paul, through our three-pillared mission of academic excellence, passion for Christ, and leadership development, we strive to equip our young students with the skills needed to be tomorrow's thinking leaders. We are thankful for the work of the Trinity Forum, so we can point our students to Christian thought leaders with such diverse areas of expertise. It is a privilege for us to partner with MBA and Trinity Forum in tonight's timely conversation with Dr. West and Dr. George.
Good evening, and we are grateful for your being part of tonight's Trinity Forum. MBA partnering with St. Paul Christian Academy has been a part of the Trinity Forum for almost a decade now, and we are incredibly grateful for this relationship. I am proud to work with several of the board members who are intimately involved with the Trinity Forum. Obviously, I think the world of Cherie, and I am particularly pleased about the caliber and quality of the speakers who have been part of the Trinity Forum over the years, and how much the conversation about ideas and important topics have meant to a variety of people in the Nashville area, as well as, of course, around the world. And I've also been impressed with what the Trinity Forum has done online and virtually over the last 6 to 7 months. I think they've done a terrific job. Tonight's program is, I think, especially important right now at a time when there's a lot of polarity in our country, a lot of divisiveness over the political election and the different sides of the aisle. And having heard both Dr. West and Dr. George several times, I know how meaningful it will be to all of us to listen to them tonight and see ways in which people that look at the world differently but understand that friendship should undergird all concerns in a positive way and bring us all together and work positively with one another, even with radically different opinions. Both of them are incredible speakers, incredibly articulate and wonderful people, and we are honored to be with them tonight. And again, I thank all of you for your interest in the Trinity Forum, this program in particular, and being part of the events we've had here in Nashville. Again, I'm Brad Joya. I teach English and I'm headmaster at MBA, and it is my privilege to welcome both Dr. West and Dr. George and Cherie. So I hope you enjoy a terrific evening.
Thanks so much, Brad and Susan. And on behalf of all of us at the Trinity Forum, I want to welcome you to tonight's online evening conversation. It's been such a pleasure to continue to work with our friends at the Montgomery Bell Academy and at St. Paul Christian Academy to continue to bring these events, even in the midst of a pandemic. As Brad mentioned, it's been almost a decade since MBA and St. Paul and Trinity Forum started partnering, bringing semi-annual in-person events to Nashville. And it's been a pleasure to work with them to try to creatively continue that collaboration and partnership. So thanks so much, Brad and Susan. I'd also like to particularly thank Betsy and Larry Rodman, as well as Stephen and Jan Riven for their sponsorship of tonight's online conversation, as well as all of you who have taken time out from your busy evening to join us tonight. So tonight's online evening conversation wrestles with a question that is on the minds of perhaps all of us. How do we preserve liberal democracy in the midst of deep division? Even as we are rapidly becoming a more religiously, ethnically, racially, sociologically, and certainly politically diverse nation, we're also becoming an angrier, more alienated and polarized one. As our differences have waxed, it seems, our ability to engage them constructively has waned. Recent polls have shown that even as we, the people, often express ideologically incoherent points of view, We're united to our political tribe not by agreement on policy or principle or even shared affection, but rather an increased fear and loathing of those on the other side. Some polls have even gone so far to show that a sizable chunk of partisans on either side think the country would be better off if a big chunk of those in opposition simply died. For many of us, this is keenly felt on a personal level as the last few years have strained or even severed longtime friendships or relationships with family members. But it's also a daunting civic challenge, as the very nature of liberal democracy, and certainly our own republic, requires a willingness to respect, work with, live with, and love those with whom we disagree. So at a time when our political differences seem so deep and the stakes so high, how do we live out our deepest convictions and live together as friends, neighbors, and fellow citizens? And how do we find unum amidst the pluribus and preserve democracy amidst deep difference? These are certainly difficult questions, and there are no easy answers. But it's hard to imagine two people who have wrestled more deeply or wisely with those questions, or better embody a way forward than our speakers tonight. Often called an ideological odd couple, Professor Cornel West and Professor Robert George might seem to have little in common politically, ideologically, or even stylistically. One is a radical, another a conservative, one a Roman Catholic, the other a self-described funky Baptist, one a banjo player, the other a rap artist. But they share a deep friendship, a common faith, and a long-standing commitment and collaboration to encourage, in their own words, the cultivation and practices of the virtues of intellectual humility, openness of mind, and above all, love of truth. Dr. Cornel West is the inaugural Laney Professor of Practice of Public Philosophy at Harvard University, and while also holding the title of Professor Emeritus at Princeton. He graduated from Harvard in just 3 years, obtained his MA and PhD in philosophy at Princeton, has written more than 20 books and edited another 13 works, including his classics Race Matters and Democracy Matters, and his memoir, Brother West, Living and Loving Out Loud. He's produced 3 spoken word albums and made his film debut in The Matrix, as well as appearing in over 25 other documentaries and films. Joining him is his friend, Dr. Robert George. Dr. George is the McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and the director of the James Madison Center at Princeton University. He served as the chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, was on the President's Council on Bioethics, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and was also a U.S. member of UNESCO's World Commission on Ethics of Science and Technology. He has also written quite a number of books, including Making Men Moral, In Defense of Natural Law, The Clash of Orthodoxies, Conscience and Its Enemies, and many others. He holds an MTS and JD degrees from Harvard, a DPhil and BCL and DCL degrees from Oxford, and 19 honorary degrees. Dr. George and Dr. West, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Sheree.
Thank you. Thank you.
Such a pleasure to be back with you.
It's a
Great to
blessing.
see
It's a blessing, my dear sister.
So we're just going to dive right into it here. We know that time is short, and we are certainly in an unsettling moment. We are just a week away from an election that's often seen in apocalyptic terms. There's a sense that our politics increasingly shapes our identity, while our politics itself has gotten increasingly cataclysmic, and that those who disagree with us are not merely mistaken, but there's an increasing sense that they are bent on evil and wrongdoing, and so therefore need to be defeated, canceled, and shunned. And then in contrast to that growing sense, there's the two of you and the example of your friendship. The two of you have taught classes together, you worked together, started a movement around protecting academic freedom together, and so on. And you both have spoken about the way in which your friendship has not only enriched your life, but even enhanced your work and sharpened your mind. So, how do you sustain and nurture your own friendship when you disagree on matters that are very important to you? And what guidance would you give to your more divided and distrustful fellow citizens? Robbie, let's start with you.
Well, I'm glad you're starting with me. Ordinarily, I wouldn't want to be put on the spot, but Cornel West is a very tough act to follow. So on this occasion, I'm happy to go first. Before I address your very important question, let me say thank you to you, Cherie, and to the Trinity Forum, St. Paul Academy, and Montgomery Bell Academy for the opportunity to be with you all again this evening. Cornel and I had such a wonderful visit when we could do it in person the last time we were together. And although this is only second best, it's still lovely to be able to be back with you and with everyone in the constituencies of the sponsors. Also want to thank everyone who helped this evening to make it possible. Hannah and Callie and Ross in particular, thank you for your efforts. And what a blessing and a joy and a pleasure to be with my beloved friend Cornel West. It is always just such a wonderful, wonderful thing when we're able to get together. We haven't been able to get together as much because of this pandemic, who has been, but it's a great opportunity, and I'm so pleased to be back with Cornel. Cornel is our nation's leading public intellectual. Right, left, center, you name it. And he sets the standard, the gold standard, for a politically engaged, serious scholar, serious thinker and intellectual. And this really takes me to your question. Let me ask myself, how is it that despite our disagreements, Cornel's the honorary chairman of Democratic Socialists of America, I'm an old-fashioned traditional conservative, how is it that I have so much trust in my friend, learn so much from him, enjoy our time together, learn so much from our interaction, love him truly as a brother, not just as a friend, truly as a brother. And I think at the heart of that is simply this: integrity. Integrity. It's Cornel's integrity. You cannot not respect a person of integrity. You can try, but that's going to win you because it's the foundation of trust. The foundation of trust. You know that a person who has integrity is not trying to manipulate you. He's not trying to trick you. He's not trying to take advantage of you. He genuinely cares about your well-being as well as his own. We've entered into that relationship that Aristotle described so beautifully, unsurpassed to this day in the Nicomachean Ethics. I think it's in chapter 10, where he talks about the way friends enter into each other's lives. Friendship is based on love. Love is the willing of the good of the other for the sake of the other. And when the dialectic of friendship is up and going, I value my friend values me. I value myself in part because he values me, and so forth and so on. Today, we talk a lot about identity. That reflects something that I think is very fundamental to our condition and the deep problems that we're in. All this talk about identity reveals a kind of tribalism, which is very human. It's very human for us to be tribal. It's very human for us to sink back into our group, our clan, our class, our party, our tribe, and to get into groupthink and think along with the tribe. And everything's about solidarity with the tribe and never questioning the tribe, no matter what the tribe wants to do, no matter what the techniques are being used, no matter whether it's the truth being told to advance the tribe's interest or lies being told to advance the tribe's interest. Well, all this talk about identity, and I'm just here borrowing from Cornel, all this talk about identity has tended to put into the shade what really matters, and that's integrity. We need less concern with identity and tribalism, much more with integrity, which enables people to transcend tribalism. People with integrity are going to be honest. People with integrity are going to be open to others. People with integrity are going to be not too sure that they know the truth and that they're right about everything. That doesn't mean they're going to be moral skeptics or moral relativists and pretend not to know anything about the truth, or pretend not to have opinions or convictions, or not to act on their opinions and convictions. Neither Cornel nor I is a moral relativist. We've got convictions and we are sure prepared to act on those convictions. And yet what I admire so much about Cornel and try to emulate myself is an openness to being challenged, to hearing a different point of view, having the courage and the humility to consider whether you might be wrong about something. Or even if you're not completely wrong about something, you might have something to learn from somebody else, a person of goodwill with intelligence, who's thought about issues just as you have, who cares about people, cares about the dignity of the human being just as you do. Despite our differences, I don't have any doubt about Cornel's profound commitment to the dignity of all. And that's at the foundation of our friendship. That reflects that integrity that I'm talking about here. So now, how do we encourage that more broadly?
Mhm.
I cannot think of a better way. I can write books. Cornel can write books. We can preach. And that's good. And you have to do that. And we've both done it. And you can teach our classes. We do that. We exhort our students to lead lives of integrity, open-mindedness, not being too certain of ourselves all the time, being willing to learn from other people. We can preach that. But there's something that's even more important, not in any way to diminish the importance of preaching and teaching. And that is modeling, being an exemplar, setting an example. We human beings, and not just children, learn every bit as much, if not more, by the example other people set than by the precept that they give us. If you're a parent, you know this, you know your kids are watching every move you make. And if you talk one way, preach one way, teach one way, and act another way, they're going to follow what you do, not what you say. Christian parents understand that. Jewish parents understand that. Muslim parents understand that. Everybody understands that. But sometimes we live as if we don't understand that. And here in our public life, we are profoundly in need of these exemplars. Cornel and I try in our own way. We're just a couple of eggheads. We're just a couple of intellectuals. We're not politicians. We're not big business people. We don't have money and power. But we try in our way with what influence we have to be a model. We're cracked vessels, as Cornel says. We let the side down. We fail. We stumble. But when we fail, we try to get up again after you fall, try again, fail again, but maybe fail better. Maybe fail better. And in doing that, not only lead a life of integrity, respectful of human dignity, but also maybe send a message by the conduct that other people observe of how people should live. In fact, I'm borrowing this from you, Cherie. What proves the possible is the actual. You said that to us before our meeting began today, and we had a little huddle of the people who are involved on the screen here.
I think it was Immanuel Kant rather than me.
Oh, well, you borrowed it from a very good source, Immanuel Kant. Yeah, the possible. The possible is proved by the actual. If people see that they can live with integrity, that they can build trust on integrity, that they don't have to treat their fellow citizens as enemies, even if they disagree, that they can retain civic friendship, a respect for each other as fellow citizens, even when you think the other guy's wrong, that you can be open to learning, maybe correcting your own view, maybe finding out, discovering that you were wrong about the issue. If people can see that in practice, I think it will make a big difference. But we need it across the spectrum. It just can't be a couple of eggheads. It's got to be leaders in business. It's got to be leaders in politics. It has to be people in journalism and celebrities in the media. And let me tell you one last thing, Cherie. We need it in the church. We need it in the church. When people behave hypocritically, it's always bad, but it's at its worst. Hypocrisy is its worst when it's in the church, because this undermines people's faith in the institution of the church itself. So we need more religious leaders who exemplify these virtues of integrity, of honesty, of courage, of openness. Openness is entirely consistent with having strong convictions and acting on those strong convictions. As a Christian, for example, member of one of the other great faiths, right? That's compatible. You mustn't think that anybody will suppose that you don't believe what you really teach if you're dogmatic about it. You don't have to be dogmatic. You can still listen. You can still learn. Well, that's the end of my little sermon. I'm going to turn it over to Cornel.
Dr.
Oh,
West.
Brother Robert, you are always powerful, though. Each time I hear you, I say, I want to hear more because it's coming from your soul, it's coming from your mind, it's coming from your heart, and it's coming from the best of the traditions that you build on. Dear Sister Cherie, we salute you. I salute you. You have been so kind in terms of facilitating the kind of dialogue and dynamic between Brother Robbie and myself. You're always eloquent in your formulations, and you are sincere and full of integrity as well in terms of being so deeply concerned about this crisis. And I think it's a crisis that takes the form of a spiritual decay and a moral decrepitude. It has political consequences, it has economic consequences, but it has very much to do with the kind of human beings that too many of our fellow human beings and fellow citizens have chosen to be. That we live in a time in which the very notion of being human is more and more reduced to just might makes right. I'll say what I want to do what I want to do, and get away with it with no responsibility, no accountability, no answerability. It's the triumph of Thrasymachus over Socrates rather than Socrates over Thrasymachus in Plato's Republic. We live in a time in which people are so obsessed with things and material toys so that greed has become more and more a desirable condition rather than gaining access to things and recognizing that they are secondary to character. They're secondary to the virtues that Brother Robbie was talking about. And so Brother Robbie and I, we're just two brothers from vanilla and chocolate side of town who come together at Princeton and say, we are deeply attracted to, for me, his sincerity, his integrity, his honesty. So I'm blessed to be able to revel in his humanity. And over the years, it's become, as you rightly say, it's deeper than a friendship. It's a brotherhood. It's a familyhood. Our families come together. We wrestle, we argue, we pray together. He plays the banjo. I sing in and out of tune, different songs in class and whatever. So we'll be able to see something that we know is just so true, namely that you can't reduce love to politics. You can't do it in your family. You can't do it in your neighborhood. You can't do it in your church, your mosque, your synagogue. You can't do it in your society. You can't reduce brotherhood and sisterhood to agreement on issues of public policy. That we can go at it tooth and nail on public policy, but at the same time, there's aspects and dimensions of his humanity that I never want to lose sight of. And I will never allow anything or anybody to get in the way of my love for my dear brother Robin. Not just because I'm a Christian, but as human beings, we've been able to spend that kind of time to generate the kind of trust, respect that constitutes, joys in one's life. And I didn't say pleasures. So much of American culture is a joyless quest for insatiable pleasures. But we're talking about joys. And it cuts much deeper. It's much more enduring. Now, just briefly, I noticed that that beautiful painting that we started with was Kent. And it reminded me what happened in 1381 with the complete collapse of trust, of social bonds, where spiritual decay and moral decrepitude led forward a massive rebellion. They call it the Peasants' Rebellion, but the peasants were just a slice of it. It was multi-class. And John Ball was the preacher. He's called the Mad Priest of Kent. He was the one who gave the sermon that helped facilitate that rebellion. And it was an ugly rebellion. Over 1,500 fellow human beings, children of God, were killed. It was a terrorizing. It was a traumatizing. And those particular subordinated peoples were wrong to engage in that kind of violent, vicious attack on King Henry. He's huddled up in the Tower of London. They're killing the Chancellor. They killed the Chancellor of the University of Cambridge. Brother Robbie went to Oxford. You see, so that you say, that those are crimes against humanity. At the same time, the very conditions that they were wrestling with the plague, heavy taxes on the poor, well-to-do swerving from it. You see, war with France. So you get a complete breakdown, and you see the worst in each and every one of us as human beings. And then in 1381, and we know Robert Southey would write a famous play of 1794 that he would be upset that he did, because when he comes poet laureate and he's a conservative, then it's Hazlitt and others who bring that back and say, oh, look how radical you were. Wordsworth was radical too. Coleridge was radical too. Now you've moved to the right. Yes, because we hate this violence, this terror, and rightly so. We must all oppose any form of terror, any form of trauma, any form of attack on innocent people. And at the same time, we want to make sure that the conditions under which all of us live can also affirm our sanctity, given that we are all made in the image of God, no matter what color, no matter what gender, no matter what sexual orientation. So I just thought of that when I saw that, Kent, because it was so calm and halcyon. And you can remember when it breaks down. Chaucer is right there in Aldgate. He sees the folk walking by. He's going to write Canterbury Tales to try to get inside the humanity of the poor and the rich, the middle classes and the poor classes. One of the great roles of our great artists. And in such a moment, we need exemplars, like Brother Robbie said. We need Chaucer-like artists, Shakespeare-like artists, Coltrane-like artists, Dylan-like artists that get below our racial, sexual, national identities to our rich humanity and reaffirm our sense of being made in the image of God. And those moves are always weak and feeble. And that's why you need persons who have courage, persons who have a willingness to step out. And when we step out together, then our identities are grounded in that integrity Brother Robbie's talking about, but also a solidarity. And solidarity is simply, I am on your side, not because I agree with everything you, not because we're the same color or same gender, because as a human being, I want to protect, respect, and correct. 3 pillars of love. When you love somebody, you protect them, you respect them, and you correct them. And that golden rule says you want others to protect you, respect you, correct you. It is reciprocal. It is mutual all the way down. And I think that, 1381, 1968, 1933, you can just think of certain years, 1848, all of them could jump out. Mandela, 1994, so forth and so. Persons who were able to step forward in the midst of the ugliness, sometimes on both sides, usually on both sides. But at the same time, when there's a balance of power, you can't use your relative powerlessness to eclipse morality. But you can't use your powerfulness to eclipse morality either. That truth and goodness and beauty is bigger than each and every one of us, bigger than all of our groups.
I'm just fascinated that Cornel went right to the matter of the Peasants' Rebellion. I didn't think of that when I was admiring that painting, but you're absolutely right. That's what it calls to mind. And that
Castle, yeah.
Yeah, that in turn, Cornel, brings to mind something that you and I, when we were together earlier this we're talking about. And it's something worth bringing up here, Cherie, and that is we all have to be cognizant of the ways in which even just causes, we all want to fight for just causes, even just causes can become the occasions of evil actions, of injustices, of crimes against humanity. Think of how many good causes have been sullied and even discredited by bad behavior, evil actions, killing, raping, in the cause of something the people who were advancing it really did honestly consider to be just and objectively may very well have been just. We can all think of examples of that. We fall into the old error that your mother, I'm sure all of our mothers taught us about. That is thinking that a good enough end can justify an evil means. But Mom was right. There is no such good enough end. An evil means is always evil. It's never to be employed, no matter how noble the ends. It undermines the good cause. It discredits the good cause, the just cause that you have set out to defend. And that's something that the whole history of humanity, as Cornel was just mentioning, testifies to. In 1789, there was an uprising against the ancien regime. The old regime had a lot to answer for. There was a lot of injustice, a lot of abuse, a lot of evil. And yet we got not a glorious revolution and liberation. We got the terror, the guillotine, the mass slaughter. Look at 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution. 1948, Mao Zedong. We move forward in Pol Pot. Think of all these examples from human history. Now, are we going to learn from those examples or are we not? If we learn from them, then we will realize that integrity and honesty and decency requires in all circumstances, no matter how good the cause we're fighting in, respect for human dignity. We human beings, we like to be respected. We love to be protected. We don't much care to be corrected.
Correct.
But Cornel's absolutely right. That love means all three. Not just the respect, that's easy, that's good. Not just the protect, we all want to be that, want to be protected, but also the corrected, which means we need to have the integrity to be open to correction, to consider that maybe we are wrong about something, need correction, at least in part need correction. So you mentioned earlier that statement that Cornel and I put out on democracy, truth-seeking, and freedom of thought and expression in 2017. And there we were making the argument that to accomplish the goals of universities, that is truth-seeking, and the goals of Republican democracy, that is self-government, you need these very virtues that we're talking about. Humility, love of truth more than your own opinions, which means a willingness to be corrected, not just respected and protected, but corrected, and an openness to engagement of the other side. And finally, rejection of this tribalism, just to bring it back round, Cherie, to where you began. If I had to say what the fundamental problem we've got today that should worry all of us and keep us up at night, it's this tribalism that has been unleashed. People will lie, cheat, and steal for the sake of the tribe. They will overlook any wrong on our side, and of course, immediately put the finger on the wrong on the other side. They will assume our side can do no wrong. Their side is simply evil. Their side are not our fellow citizens who happen to be wrong about something and should be corrected. They are the bad guys, the enemies who need to be defeated and even destroyed. You cannot sustain a Republican democracy with that kind of collapse of civic friendship based on this kind of tribalism. We've just got to overcome it. And there are people on both sides who are completely giving up. And that really worries me. So if there's a message,
that's the sad thing. And one of the paradoxes of tribalism is that you get spiritual decay within the tribe. So that, I mean, if you push aside the 10 commandments and obsessed with the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. And it's just a matter of the survival of the slickest and the most powerful from within the tribe, then you're still pulling the rug from under even the narrow tribalism. Now, tribalism itself must be called into question. We're looking to something bigger than us. As Christians, we're looking to the kingdom of God. If the kingdom of God is within us, then everywhere we go, we ought to leave a little heaven behind. Now, how are you going to leave heaven behind if it's twisted and thwarted by either a narcissism and egoism or a tribalism and groupism or a group think that doesn't allow the love to flow to everybody and does not allow you to think critically for yourself? And here the Socratic legacy of Athens becomes very, very important. I think even as Christians, we recognize that there's got to be a Socratic element. And by Socratic element, it's simply what Robbie was starting with, which is humility. Now, we already have that in the legacy of Jerusalem and Hebrew scripture, but there's an intellectual integrity and humility in Socrates. that we have much to learn. This is what Erasmus meant when he said, pray for us, Saint Socrates. Now, he wasn't trying to sanctify our pagan brother from Athens, but what he was saying was there's an overlap of Christian conceptions of being humble before an almighty God, being a cracked vessel, and knowing that in trying to open oneself with a vulnerability and a vincibility that allows one to receive a grace and bear witness to a love that the rest of the world can see in you and say, oh, there goes one of those Jesus-loving folk. There goes one of those Christians. Look at all that love. Look at all that joy. Look at all that freedom. They're not afraid of nobody and nothing but God. Where'd they get that from? Well, let me tell you a story. And you give a little testimony, and lo and behold, you got a fascinating exchange. Deeper than Socratic dialogue, you got a possibility of transformation. Well, I think what Brother Robbie's talking about is the ways in which this Socratic legacy and this prophetic legacy, Athens, Jerusalem, come together. And in the US context, it means in a democratic experiment, fragile, but founded on indigenous people's land, grounded in part enslavement of Africans, subordination of workers, white brothers as well as white sisters, women in general, marginalized, confined to domestic household, can't go to certain schools, can't vote until 1920. And this is not just political correctness. These are facts of human history that we need to stay in contact with, but we have to do it in such a way that we're still connected to each other's humanity. That's why, again, identity, any talk about identity, racial, gender, national, what is the moral content of it? Is it talking about integrity? What is the scope of it? Does it allow for solidarity for people on the other side of town, on the other side of the country, on the other side of the world? Because we are internationalists. A baby in Somalia, in Ethiopia, a baby in China, a baby in Thailand has exactly the same value as a precious baby in Nashville.
You know, Cornel, some of the early church fathers were so impressed by the sheer power of the insights of Plato and so puzzled that he could apparently have these insights without the benefit of Hebrew revelation, that they actually speculated as to whether Plato might have had some access to a scroll of the Hebrew scripture. Or another theory that was floated by some of the church fathers was, might Plato have been given a personal revelation of some aspects of the Hebrew revelation in scripture? Now, no church father that I know of finally, I think, embraced that idea. But
you remember Diogenes Allen at Princeton Theological Seminary? He used to teach a course on the pagans and the Christians, and he was leaning certain days in that direction, as if the Greeks had some biblical revelation. No, I think Leo Strauss would straighten him out on that. No, they are in deep tension. In the end, even incompatible, but you have to have both, and you got to live the tension. Socratic questioning on the one hand, prophetic witness of love on the other.
Well, I agree with that we have to have them both, but I'm not so sure they're in such tension. Now, Cornel, this is so funny. So Cornel, the progressive, is being more of a Straussian than Robbie, the conservative. I think we got a deep compatibility here, but that also could be a problem.
Well, you got Aquinas. You got Aquinas working. I got Kierkegaard working. So
before we go back to Cherie, just one other point.
But that's Cherie. Absolutely.
Just one last point, Cherie. If you look again at the statement that Cornel and I did on democracy and truth seeking back in 2017, you see that we put a lot of emphasis on rights and liberties. That's something Cornel and I stand for. It's a part of the bond between us, is this commitment to civil liberties. Now, why is that? Well, it's not because we think that liberty is in itself valuable. With liberty, it depends on how you use it. And yet we recognize that liberty is the condition for the realization of values by human beings exercising free will. That is, if we're to be truth seekers, we need the liberty. We can't be coerced. We can't be indoctrinated. We can't be threatened. If we are, then we lose the capacity for truth seeking. Same for self-government, same for republicanism. If this Republican experiment in ordered liberty is going to succeed, you need rights and liberties to be protected. So here Cornel and I are, from our different positions on the spectrum, arguing for the strong civil libertarian position on our university campuses, against the campus culture, against the indoctrination, arguing in favor of viewpoint diversity, arguing in favor of people being able to speak their minds, even expressing radical opinions or opinions that upset us, that unsettle us, that scandalize us, and in the broader democracy, arguing for the rights and liberties of all to participate, even people we radically disagree with.
Absolutely.
So much to dig into, but with our time rapidly fleeting, I think we probably should go to some questions from our viewers. And there have been quite a few that have stacked up, and it seems like there's particularly a lot on the concept of integrity. So I'm going to combine a couple, and then maybe you can each take a shot at what you'd like to within the combination. So Brian Brockman asked, have we lost the concept of integrity in current discourse? Or maybe more, does mainstream society value integrity at all today? Relatedly, Colin Hanna asked, are intellectual integrity and honest openness fundamentally incompatible with the concept of absolute truth? Why don't we start with you on that one, Cornel?
One is that we must have a conception of truth, capital T. There's no doubt about that. That's what we're after. That's what we're in quest of. It's just that no one of us have possession of it. See, to be a human being means, in fact, that you're finite. It means you're fallible. For we Christians, it means you're fallen. And so you have a partiality. You have access to a grace that's greater than you, but you don't have a monopoly on truth. And the same would be true in terms of beauty and grace. Now, at the same time, therefore, you're not a relativist. You're not a nihilist. You're not a thoroughgoing skeptic that says that you give up on the quest for truth because you don't possess it. You see, no, that's a failure of nerve. You see, that's a certain kind of spinelessness in the life of the mind. That's an intellectual haphazardness. Just because you don't have the whole thing, you assume it must not exist at all. No. And if you claim it doesn't exist at all, is that the truth? Well, then you letting it in the back door, so that you still have the courage to attempt to engage in the quest. But I do believe there's a hunger, there's a thirst among fellow citizens of all colors, for integrity, for honesty. And we see it on the local levels. It's just hard for it to be manifest at a national level. And the national level is so corrosive that is now negatively shaping the local in ways that is very sad, and we have to bounce back. But no, the beautiful thing is, just like love, integrity never goes out of fashion, no matter how small the group is, no matter how limited the cloud of witnesses are, because it speaks deeply to something inside of human beings. And you see it in terms of relations, because there's no love without integrity. There's no love without vulnerability. There's no love without invincibility. You say, well, have we reached the point where we're all like Hamlet, where we want to be smart? And part of the well-to-do class, he was a prince, but he suffered from an inability to love. And Dostoevsky said, hell is suffering from the inability to cultivate love, to go through your whole life and never experience the joys of what love is all about. So that integrity goes hand in hand with that love. And for Christians, I think we have to acknowledge that that's what the Roman Empire wants us to believe, that they snuffed out all of that love in that Palestinian Jew named Jesus. But he bounced back.
Yeah. There was a great figure in my own field, the jurist, Judge Leonard Hand, who famously said that the spirit of liberty is the spirit of not being too sure you're right. Now, I will confess that the first time I heard that as a law student at Harvard many, many years ago, back in the Middle Ages, I reacted negatively, precisely for the reason that I think that second questioner has in mind here. I thought to myself, well, now, wait a minute, if the spirit of liberty is the spirit of not being too sure you're right, well, why would anybody ever then act for justice, act for truth, act for the sake of a good cause? Is Judge Hand exhorting us to moral relativism or subjectivism? Is he denying that there's any truth? And the big breakthrough for me in seeing the wisdom of Hand's point was to understand that Hand was not rejecting the idea of truth. He was rejecting the idea of hubris, that we could believe that we were infallible. It was fallibility, not relativism, that he was preaching here. Recognize your own fallibility. And when you do that, as Cornel says, that's the basis for the humility that enables you to be a genuine truth seeker. So far from that humility, that openness being the enemy of truth seeking, it's the condition of truth seeking. Why should we be open-minded? So that we will not fall so deeply in love with our opinions that we care about them more than we care about truth. That we'll want to stick with our opinions and not be challenged, not be shown that we're wrong, even if we are wrong. We human beings, we very easily fall in love with our opinions. We build our identities around our opinions. We wrap our emotions around our opinions. I'll tell you something else. Our opinions make us members of certain groups from which we derive solidarity, comfort, friendship, pats on the back, told how wonderful we are. Cornel and I have had that experience. When you advocate a certain political position, the people who share that position, they rally around you. And if you articulate it well and eloquently and write valuable articles about it, they'll pat you on the back and they'll tell you you're wonderful and you get a lot of affirmation. But then what happens if on another issue, or maybe even on this issue, you think again, you reconsider, you think, maybe, well, I wasn't quite right about that. I've got to change that a little bit. Maybe I have to change that dramatically. All of a sudden you lose all your friends because they're not so excited about you anymore. Eager to pat you on the back and tell you how wonderful you are, give you all that affirmation. I warn my students, Cornel has heard me do this. I warn my students, my goodness, kids, be wary, very wary of applause. Stating opinions that gives you applause, because there is no drug on earth, heroin, fentanyl, you name it. There's no drug more addictive than applause. It is a drug. That affirmation that you get from your tribe, from your group, because you've become their champion. And when you get some of that applause, some of that affirmation, you want more. And you begin to fear that you're not going to do it. And then instead of seeking truth and speaking truth, you're just the echo chamber. You're just reinforcing people in what they already believe. You're saying what's expected to be said to advance the interests of our tribe, our clan, our group, our political party, our ideological movement. And that's not truth loving. That's not truth seeking. So the lover of truth will be humble before the truth and never be too certain that he's got the truth. Always be open to challenge, criticism, being unsettled, rethinking. And we mustn't worry. And here I hope Cornel and I can set an example, especially for young people. We're a couple of older guys now. Maybe a little bit, maybe we can show young people. And here's what it is. You can be a truth seeker without worrying that you will be paralyzed into inaction. Both Cornel and I have been very active in the causes that we believe in. Cornel has gone to jail for the causes that he believes in. I've been very outspoken in the causes that I believe in. I've worked very hard, dedicated my time and energy and attention to them without, I hope, I certainly know this is true of Cornel, without being a dogmatist, without shutting down a recognition that there are reasonable people on the other side who disagree. And I perhaps have something to learn from them. And I should respect them and I shouldn't shut them down.
We're going to take just one more question. And again, we're going to try to combine some of these because I see a lot of questions that really pertain to practical advice on how one cultivates this kind of mindset and outlook. Gay Marie Vaughn asked, how do we teach these virtues if the public schools don't? Let's see here. Deborah asked, are there practical ways that we can allow ourselves to be transformed into the integrity-oriented image of God seers that we want to be? Related to that, you are both in the education business, the formation business. of young minds and hearts and spirits. You're also both Christians who believe in the spiritual disciplines that essentially embodied practices help form our loves. What counsel or guidance do you have for practices that encourage the kind of truth seeking, the kind of fearlessness, and the kind of devotion to what is true and right over approval and applause that would be so helpful, not only for our souls, but also for the sake of democracy?
I think part of it is just acknowledging what's already at work in our own life. We have members of our family who we love and we disagree. We've got various friends. I mean, no one lives in a thoroughly homogenized space. From Thanksgiving dinner, where you got a variety of different perspectives with family, to your neighborhood, in your church, in your little league, in your music networks or whatever. So it's already at work that we're learning from each other and we're learning from different people. Now, it might be that our neighborhoods are not as racially integrated, class integrated, and so forth, but even within those particular neighborhoods, you got diversity. Diversity is not just a racial thing. It's not just a gender thing. It's not just sexual orientation, but it's personal. It could be intellectual identity. You got people clashing in terms of what they believe in religion and so on. So we already have that at work. We just have to fortify ourselves. And here, Ephesians 6 becomes more and more important every day. How thick is your armor of integrity, of that truth and righteousness and so forth, in a world that's always been cold, always been cruel, always been sin sick, but these days becomes even thicker, and therefore our armor must be thicker in order to build the kind of bridges that constitute that have to overcome the walls that we have, the racial walls and the gender walls and the political walls and the ideological walls. And that ought to be one of the benchmarks of the Christian. When Jesus said, love your enemies, that was not just a side remark. That was integral to what Christian discipleship is. If you're following me, you're going to have so many enemies that you don't want them to be the point of reference. You love them because they're made in the image of God. They're worthy of being loved, and they can be changed. They can go another way. They can change the way you have been changed in your life. That doesn't mean that they may not be your political foe. I mean, Brother Donald Trump is my political foe. I understand that. Very much so. But he's still a brother. He's made in the image of God. He's still a brother. He can change. I've called him a gangster. Why? Because I know gangsters. I was a gangster before I met Jesus. And now I'm a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivities. The gangster in me must be conquered every day. And so when you call somebody a gangster, you're not demonizing him. He's on the same human continuum as I am. And he's made in the image of the same God. But so that you can have a foe, but you're loving your enemies. This is one of the benchmarks of the Christian, it seems to me. And that cannot be tossed aside in a highly polarized and gangsterized world.
So true. One thing I think we have to be asking ourselves, what messages are our young men and women, our children getting from the schools, from the media, from the celebrity culture, from parents? Are they getting the message that what is really important and you need to be focused on is, for example, getting a good education, going to Princeton or Vanderbilt or Harvard or Ohio State or wherever it is, in order to have a life marked by wealth, power, influence, status, prestige? Those are not bad things in themselves. I want my students to get good jobs, high-paying jobs, contribute a little money back to Princeton. That would be good. I want them to be influential. I glory in their achievements. I want them to have power. I like it when my students go on to important positions where they influence things, make a difference. And yet, it's critical that we recognize and that they recognize that those things, while not bad in themselves, they can be good. If you use your wealth for good things, that's good. If you use your influence for good things, your power, your prestige, your social status, that's good. But while they are not in themselves bad and can even be good when used for good purposes, they are not what matters ultimately. They are not the most important things. They are secondary, they are derivative, and yet by a million messages from schools, from the media, from celebrities, even from parents, students are getting the message that what really matters is getting ahead. Get that Princeton or Vanderbilt sticker on the back of our car. Get a great job at Goldman Sachs. I have no problem with Goldman Sachs. Go make a lot of money. That's great. Use it for good purposes. But that's not ultimately what matters in life. What matters are faith, family, integrity, honesty, respect for human dignity, beauty. These are what are ultimate and non-derivative, primary, not secondary. And yet we've had this transvaluation of values that's left our young people very mixed up. Can you blame them? Where are they getting the counter message? Even in church, are they getting the counter message? Are they getting the real Christian, high octane Christian message? It's really important for all of us, Cherie, and especially for our young people to understand the critical significance of having a strong interior life. Those spiritual disciplines you're talking about, beginning with prayer, those in the sacramental traditions, the Orthodox, the Catholic, the Anglican, and so forth, the sacraments, meditation, fasting, these great disciplines that the great spiritual masters, certainly in Christianity, but even going Christianity, beyond Christianity, all the great spiritual masters, the great traditions have taught are critical for the strength of the interior life. You want integrity, you better have a strong interior life. Now, the other thing is, Cornel has put some emphasis on this. It's important that we get to know and befriend people who see things differently than we do. Not only different religions, but these days, even more importantly, I mean, lots of people who have different religions agree on politics. They're part of the same ideological tribe. Right. People who see things differently. Cornel and I have both been critics of Donald Trump. Well, we've also both been critics of Hillary Clinton, and we've both been critics of Joe Biden. So we're pretty critical of the entire political establishment. But, you know, Cornel is about as harsh a critic, sharp a critic of Donald Trump as you can get. And yet he has beautiful friendship with the local man who owns and operates our Mayflower dry cleaning.
Brother Paul.
Complete Trumpian.
He's my brother.
He shunned, I dare say, by 9 out of 10 members of the Princeton faculty. I wish it were otherwise, but I'd imagine they would think he's a deplorable, he's a bad guy, he's a racist, he's terrible because he's for Donald Trump. Who's his dear friend? Cornel West. And they're not dear friends because they avoid politics. They can go at each other.
Oh, yeah.
They go at each other, but they love each other and they respect each other. And that at the foundation in both sides is integrity, because Paul could say the same thing about Cornel. Oh, he's that extremist, lunatic, left-wing nut, thinks everybody's a racist. I'm not going to have anything to do with him. No, he loves Cornel. Cornel loves him. They're political opponents, but they are more fundamentally friends. Reach out. Do what Cornel does with Paul or with me. Reach out to somebody you don't see eye to eye with and build a friendship. Now, you don't have to begin by saying, who are you going to vote for the Senate? You begin by saying, how's your family? Tell me about where you grew up. What were mom and dad and grandma and grandpa like? What tradition do you come from? Where did you go to church when you were small? Where'd you go to college? What did you major in? You know, you got to get to know each other, treat each other as human beings, not just representatives of a political opinion. But then don't shy away from engaging on those points of difference, because a strong friendship is strengthened, not weakened, by being willing to talk about those things. And don't think that it's your job to constantly lecture the other guy, no matter how much more education you have or sophisticated training or fancy degrees. Cornel and I have a lot of fancy degrees. They're worth something, but not much. What really matters is thoughtfulness, integrity. Paul at Mayflower Cleaners he doesn't have fancy degrees. He's got some things to say, though, you know, and we've got to listen, even if we're on the other side of the question. I grew up in West Virginia. A lot of my classmates didn't go to college at all. But many of them are deeply thoughtful, wonderful people. I have as much to learn from them, if not more, than they have to learn from me. What business would it be of mine to be lecturing them on politics or anything else? You know, I should be trying to learn from them. We should be engaging each other on terms of equality. And there's too much in this society of people looking down on each other really from both directions. I mean, it's possible for people to look down on other people they consider to be effete, elite snobs. Now, there are effete and elite snobs, but not everybody who's got a fancy degree is an elite snob. Cornel West, not an elite snob. That's what Brother Paul recognizes at Mayflower Cleaners. And that's why he's willing to engage Cornel and not just dismiss him as one of these crazy radical academics, but it goes in the other direction too. We shouldn't be looking down on people just because they don't have a college education or don't have as fancy an education or fancy a set of degrees or the Harvard sticker on the back of the car or whatever it is.
That's true.
Cornel,
Brother Robbie's no snob at all. No, I'm telling you, you got a lot of Ralph Waldo Emerson in you, brother. Love of everyday people, ordinary people, very much so.
Well, I knew this hour would fly, and indeed it has. So as promised, we're going to give the last word to Robbie and Cornel. And Robbie, maybe we can start with you and give Cornel the final word before we sign off for the evening.
Well, first I want to say thank you. Thank you to the Trinity Forum and to both of the academies and to everyone who helped make this evening possible. And here's a final word for everyone participating this evening. Please, please keep faith with America's founding principles, the principles of the Constitution and the Declaration. When we have gone wrong in our country, it has never been because of an excess of zeal or fidelity for those great principles. It's always been on account of infidelity to those principles, a lack of keeping faith with the principles of the Declaration and the Constitution. This was the message of the greatest heroes that we have produced, of the Lincolns, of the Martin Luther Kings. They understood, and we should never fail to understand, that our founding principles are true and good. We mustn't junk them or go looking for different principles. That would be a futile quest. What we should do is redouble our efforts to be more and more faithful to those principles.
Thank you, Robbie. Cornel, last word is yours.
He says it with such power, though, very much so. But I want to thank the Academy. Sister Cherie, thank you so very much. And I think Reinhold Niebuhr would have the last word when he said, any justice that's only justice soon degenerates into something less than justice. Only love can rescue that. We're back to 1381. They had justice on their side. It became revenge, hatred, resentment. Love cuts deeper than that. It's about care. It's about concern. It's about surrender to something bigger than you. For Christians, we're surrendering to a God that loved us. And so when we look at our Christian artists like Dante and like Cervantes, like Toni Morrison, like Dostoevsky, ardent, great Christian poet, says, how do we love our crooked neighbor with our crooked hearts?
Dr. West, Dr. George, such a pleasure to host you and to talk with you. Thank you for joining us. To all of you joining us online, thank you so much for coming, and good night.